That's what we're missing so much right now, is that we don't have those prophetic, artistic voices speaking new life into our world right now because everything's shut down.
Welcome to the Daron Earlewine Podcast, where we awaken you to become who you were born to be. Here's your host, Daron Earlewine.
What is the natural result of spirituality? We're going to find out today at episode 10 of the Daron Earlewine Podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in, for downloading, for subscribing, for being a part of the growing community. Stoked to have you guys back today. And if you haven't had a chance to go give us a review out on the internets, wherever it is, wherever you listen to or watch the podcast, it'd mean the world to me for you to review, like, and share, and to subscribe to the podcast. Maybe you have a friend who is out there in the world and they need a little more faith, hope, and love. They need a little awakening to become who they are born to be. Please share the podcast with them. Hey, what is the natural result of spirituality? Here on the Daron Earlewine Podcast, each and every week, we do our best to awaken you to become who you were born to be. And that process is a process that happens through bringing your spirit to life so that you are heart, soul, mind, and strength, right? You are completely alive as a human being. And that is going to move you forward in a process of being a spiritual being in a physical body. And we want to see that happen. That's what I've given my life to do, to awaken people to that experience. And when that happens, what is going to be the natural result? If you're growing and your spiritual life is thriving, what are you going to see? And that's what I want to unpack today. And we're going to sit down with Christie. Amy is a phenomenal leader. She's the associate pastor of creativity and continuity at Grace Church, a large church that does some amazing theatrical and creative performances and productions. And Amy has spent the past 25 years of her life in an uphill battle to really help the church reclaim their love for the arts, and to put creativity and artistic expression back in the heart of the local church where it makes absolute sense that it should be. Amy's had an uphill battle because the church doesn't really thrive with artists or with creativity. I don't think if you went and you surveyed a lot of people outside of the church and you said, hey, give me one word to describe the local church, I doubt many people would be like creative. I just don't think it would happen. It used to be the case, but it isn't anymore. And Amy's been fighting this uphill battle. And she's also fighting an uphill battle because most church leadership is male. And so as a woman fighting for the heart of the church through artistic expression, you're going to love the conversation we have with Amy this week. And one of the things that I wanted to bring is a quote that changed my life 20 years ago. It was a quote by Erwin McManus. And he said that creativity is the natural result of spirituality. And when Erwin said that 20 years ago, he had to fight an uphill battle because people thought that was wrong. They thought it was heresy. They thought that was just not the case. And they didn't see any connection between creativity and spirituality. But when I heard it, I read it in his book, An Unstoppable Force, Daring to Be the Church That God Has in Mind. In fact, it's one of our background books back here. It's the bottom one here. It's because it's so foundational for me and my understanding of becoming who I was born to be that it made the shelf here back behind us. And I'd love it to make your shelf. And because if you're going to be awakened and become who you're born to be, you're going to need to be consuming content that changes your thinking, that changes your actions, that changes your attitudes, that moves you forward. You're not going to learn what you need to become who God's created you to be just by absorbing life. You're not going to learn what you need by watching TV. As much as I love like Ellen's Great Game where she jumps pies on people's face or whatever, it's not going to bring you new thinking that's going to change your actions and attitudes and create the future. So if you're going to be a leader, if you're going to be a creator, you need to be a reader. And I jumped into Unstoppable Force by Erwin 20 years ago, and I read that quote, that spirituality is the natural result, or creativity is the natural result of spirituality. And what Erwin did as I read this book is it gave words and images and ideas to things that I felt in my heart and my soul my whole life. Growing up in the local church, I didn't get it because the best music usually was never created by Christians. The best TV, the best movies, anything artistic was rarely, if ever, created in our day and age by Christians. In fact, usually it was some like C-level ripoff of an idea. And I hated that. I was a musician. I loved it. In fact, today's episode is dedicated to Eddie Van Halen, who died yesterday when recording this. Eddie Van Halen and his brother Alex probably had greater influence on my musical life and development as a drummer and as a musician than any two people. And Eddie lost a battle with cancer yesterday, and prayers go out to the whole Van Halen family and the whole Van Halen world. I've seen Van Halen probably, 15, 20 times live in concert with all three lead singers. And I love Van Halen, and I'm really sad that Eddie is gone. But the thing about it was I loved bands like Van Halen. I loved the idea of the excellence there. And then I would go to the Christian bookstore and look for something kind of like Van Halen, or sometimes in the Christian world, they'd be like, if you like Van Halen, you'll like fill in the blank. And the band might be okay, but it was never quite as good, and it was never the original. It was always a copy of the original. And there was something, and I didn't know how to kind of dissect or explain that angst until I read The Unstoppable Force and began to realize that what Erwin said made so much sense to me, that if you're connected to the most creative being in the universe, being God, if you're made in his image, right, and you're actually invited to have the honor of partnering with him to create the future, if you look at the beginnings of humanity, the fact that we were created in God's image, filled with the Spirit, and then we partnered with him, and then one of the first things we did was to get creative. We named the animals. That was job number one: partner with God, get creative. And so if you look at that understanding, Erwin breaks out in this book the idea that if you have gathered a group of people that are following the most creative being in the world, created in his image, filled with the Spirit, it should be the epicenter of human creativity. That as you grow spiritually, the natural result, you're going to grow spiritually. What you're going to do is become more creative. And I don't necessarily mean artistic. You're listening to me going, well, Darren, listen, I just don't paint. Come on, I can't sing. I can't carry a tune. I'm not saying the natural result of spirituality is art, is artistic expression. I'm saying the natural result of spirituality is creativity in every element of life. And right now, the church is not the epicenter of human creativity. And the question, I guess, that I have for you as you're listening today, as you're being awakened to become who you're born to be, are you the most creative person at your business, in your school, in your social clubs, and in just your sphere of life? I'm not saying, are you the most artistic? I'm not saying, did you paint a picture yesterday? I'm saying, do you see creativity in your life? Creative problem solving, creative thinking, creative strategies, creativity. Are you seeing it become more a natural result of your life the more you're growing in your connection to God? And as I grew up, it made me feel like I wasn't sure I wanted to be a part of Christianity or the church, because I felt like that what I saw was that the natural result of spirituality seemed to be standardization. Is that everybody wanted to be the same, act the same, dress the same, look, and I was like, I don't want to be a part of a standardization process. Because when I read the Bible, when I see what Jesus does, it seems to me like creativity should be the natural result of spirituality. And so I want to inspire you in this episode. Maybe go get Erwin's book and read it. I think you'd enjoy it. But I want to inspire you to begin seeing yourself differently and having different expectations for your impact on the world. Amy's story is going to unpack some of that, as you'll see how, as like I said, as she's fought for creativity and artistic expression in the local church. But you may not be in the local church as far as a job. You're probably not. You might not be artistic, but you are creative. 2 Peter chapter 1 is where I got my understanding, or kind of the inspiration to begin to create spiritual DNA. Because in 2 Peter 1, verse 3, it says, Jesus has the power of God by which he's given us everything we need to live and to serve God. And as I unpacked that scripture and it kind of came alive to me, I thought, man, what gives us everything we need to live? Well, physical DNA does, right? You get 23 chromosomes from mom, 23 from dad. That brought you to life. And since you were conceived, you've had everything you have needed in your physical DNA to be you. This is saying that by the power of God, that Jesus has the power of God, and he has given us, past tense, we already have it, everything we need to live and to serve God. I believe that's talking about your spiritual DNA coming to life as you come to know Jesus through faith and grace, right? And in this relationship, your spiritual DNA comes to life. And it even breaks this out, right? As it ends there, it says here that with these gifts, this is the very great and precious promises of God. With these gifts, we can share in God's nature, and the world will not ruin us with its evil desires. We can share in God's nature. As you grow and your spiritual DNA comes to life and you're participating in the spiritual nature of God, what's going to begin to happen is not just that you will overcome the evil desires of the world, but you will also begin to create the future as you participate in God's creative nature. And here's three things I want to hit real quick. We're going to jump into this, and then I want to jump into the interview. Here's three things I want you to look into to begin to shape and form how you view yourself and your expectations of what a creative life for you could look like. Number one is this. You got to begin to change your expectations, okay? You have to come to the place of believing that I am a spiritual being. The natural result of my life is going to be creativity, right? And understanding this, and that expectation is huge. And I want you to be honest right now as you're listening or as you're watching. Do you believe yourself to be creative? Like, just be honest. Let's be honest about our expectations, because it doesn't do any good to lie to ourselves or to me. But do you see yourself as creative? If you don't have an expectation that your life should be growing in creativity, you may miss it. But the natural result of spirituality is creativity. When you say, Daron, I'm not artistic. I'm not talking about art. I'm not talking about singing or dancing or painting or writing songs. I'm talking about spiritual creativity. You could be in the realm of academics. You could be in politics. You could be in entertainment. You could be in the restaurant industry. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. If you're growing in a connection, your spirit has come alive and it is growing, and the divine nature of God is growing within you, you are going to be more creative, unless you have no expectation of that being the result and you actually fight it. Because the natural result of that is going to be creativity. But if you don't have the expectation, what I see so many people do is they fight it because they think that the purpose is better behavior. The purpose is to be against a bunch of things, and they don't see it that the growth of this connection to Jesus isn't that I don't do this and I don't do that and I don't do this and I don't do that, but it's that I do join with him and bring creativity to anything that I do. In fact, this whole thing that was started by Jesus, this movement of Jesus, this movement of the way, right? The truth, the life, the church as we know it. In Acts chapter 2, when it was started, Peter steps up and filled with God's Spirit. He gets real creative because he's bringing a sermon off the spot, right? And he says, hey, guess what? This movement that's starting today, it's going to be a movement of visionaries and dreamers and servants that move out and actually change the world. He didn't say there's going to be a movement of people who are boring, really kind of not fun to be around, really normal, and honestly kind of standardized. Everybody's kind of the same, and you don't really want to hang out with them. They'll copy most things. Most of what they do will be like a bad rerun of really cool things. That's not what Peter said, right? He said this is a vision. This is a movement of visionaries and dreamers, people that are brought to life by the Spirit of God and then move and actually begin to create the future. If you don't have that as an expectation of what this means to follow Jesus, you might just miss it. I didn't say you're artistic. I said you're creative. Think about this. I think about the different realms of creativity. And I don't know that this is true. I'm just going to go out here. But I'm going to say, is there anything more creative than the Chick-fil-A drive-thru, right? A round of applause for Chick-fil-A drive-thru. We're going to let the applause track play all the way out for that one. Right now in America, I can tell you who we should vote for. Whoever came up for our president, right? No Biden, no Trump. We need to vote for the dude or the girl, whoever, I don't care, that came up with how the Chick-fil-A drive-thru works, because that is the most creative and most efficient situation I've ever seen in my life. I pulled into Wendy's the other day. I was the only car, okay? And about 6 hours later, I was given a badly made junior bacon double cheeseburger, and cold fries. And then when I asked for ketchup, the lady literally threw the ketchup out and hit me right in the eye. Right in my eyeball, ketchup. I'm just kidding. It didn't hit me right in the eyeball. It was the most lackluster, terrible experience in a drive-thru that I'd had in a long time. And then I went to Chick-fil-A the next day. And I pull up the Chick-fil-A, and literally the line, it starts at Chick-fil-A and it ended somewhere across the Illinois state line. It was the whole state of Indiana was covered with cars. And I thought, well, I can't get in this line. Yesterday at Wendy's, it took me 6 hours to get hit in the face with ketchup. How am I going to get through Chick-fil-A? Literally 15 minutes later, if that, I had the exact order I wanted. Somehow they took my order from an iPad halfway down the street and around the corner. I got to the thing. It was right. They greeted me. Always said, my pleasure. I had all the condiments I need, and God bless all the condiments at Chick-fil-A. Whoever came up with the creativity to create the condiments at Chick-fil-A. Here's my point. I don't know if it's because they're connected and are a Christian-based company. I'm choosing to believe that Chick-fil-A has the best drive-through line because someone who makes those decisions is connected to Jesus. They're growing spiritually, and they took a problem like drive-through wait times and thought, how could we get more creative? Because it seems like Wendy's has tried to figure out how to kill their restaurant by the worst service you've ever seen, okay? I'm not saying there aren't Christians at Wendy's. They may love Jesus. What I'm saying is if there are Christians at Wendy's, they're not becoming very creative because the drive-through situation is terrible. So Chick-fil-A drive-through, condiments. Somebody got creative, and I'm going to choose to believe that it was the Spirit of God through them because God loves Chick-fil-A chicken, okay? So expectations. It's not about being artistic. It's about being creative, okay? And solving problems with the mind and the heart of Christ. And it can be even Chick-fil-A problems in your life. Next thing I want you to think about this, okay? Experiences and experiments, okay? You're going to notice that everything is going to start with an E today because I have to alliterate everything because it's fun and you remember it better. So expectations. Let's take a look at that. Then look at this. Experiences and experiments. By experiences, I mean what experiences right now are filling your spirit? Because if your spirit isn't healthy and growing, neither will your creativity be. So what experiences right now are driving you to fill your spirit? I talked about reading already, okay? Some of my favorite books back here on the shelf. Currently, I'm listening to a couple different books. In the morning, I spend time alone with God, reading the Bible, listening to worship, praying. I'm going to worship regularly. I'm serving regularly, right? And I'm not saying this is about me. What I'm saying is here are some just basic experiences that you can engage in that will start to put you in the environments and the experiences that will bring health and strength to your spirit, okay? As your spirit grows, so will your creativity. Another thing that I want you to think about as far as your experiences is discovering your unique design. Because God has created you to be uniquely creative. And if you don't know who he's created you to be, you're going to just do random stuff and probably be frustrated in the process. But when you begin to understand your spiritual DNA and how God has uniquely created you, it's amazing what begins to happen in your life. If you haven't taken Spiritual DNA, the online course, I want you to head over to spiritualdna.me, buy the course, discover who God has uniquely created you to be so you know your lane of creativity in life and you can get moving and creating the future, okay? Other thing I want you to do is experiment. Give yourself permission to fail in being creative. My guess is the Chick-fil-A guy or girl that came up with the greatest drive-through thing ever probably screwed it up a couple times in the process. Creativity doesn't mean that it's ironclad and it's fail-proof. If you embrace a life of creativity, what you're going to embrace is a life of a lot of failure and experiences and experiments that go wrong. And that's okay. Give yourself permission to fail. And I think about, a couple weeks ago, we had Ben Cooley on the podcast. If you haven't listened to that episode, it's absolute just gold, the stuff that Ben drops on us. And Ben, what I love about Ben is he gave himself permission to fail. He heard about one of the world's biggest problems, which was human trafficking. And then he got creative. How can I, okay, God, your spirit has begun to stir in me that I want to do something about one of the world's greatest problems. So I know that's God's spirit in me because, I believe, right, that God speaks to us every day in everyday type of ways. And if we're growing in him, our heart and our mind will look and feel a little bit more like him. So Ben hears something that he knows would be on God's heart, like freeing people from human trafficking. And then he thinks, let's get creative. The natural result of his spiritual growth was creativity. He thought, how about this? What if I rented out a 6,000 person arena in the UK and filled it with people to tell them about human trafficking and how we could fight it? Talk about an experiment. Talk about giving himself permission to fail. Now, what usually happens or can often happen is when you get out on a limb and your faith becomes risk and you get creative, God shows up. And God did. They put almost 6,000 people in that arena. And a couple of years later, he's in 30 different countries doing his best to actually cancel out one of the greatest problems in human history. And here's my question for you is, what are you going to do in response to the greatest needs in the world? And how creative are you willing to get with God's Spirit? And what are you willing to do that might fail? What experiment is God inviting you into? You say, Daron, I'll tell you the experiment that I have right now. It's called pay the bills, right? It's called raise my freaking kids that are going bonkers. It's called virtual learning. There's the biggest problem in my life. And listen, I'm not saying those aren't issues. I got all those problems too, okay? Here's what I want to say is I just wonder if this God who says, hey, check out the flowers, check out the grass, check out the birds. Do you see them worrying? Do you see anything as beautiful as what I take care of every day in creation? Well, if I know that you have needs, trust me that I'm going to meet them. Let's stop fretting about our clothes and our bills, and you work hard and you let me take care of that. But what if we started dreaming about the biggest problems in the world? I just wonder if you begin to move out and grow spiritually, step into creativity, give yourself permission to fail, begin to grow into the experiments that God's bringing you into. Maybe you would begin to see that some of these peripheral problems in my life, God is actually taking care of as I've gone after trying to conquer one of the bigger issues in the world. If you feel like maybe you're stuck, here's what I want to send your way is that maybe you aren't dreaming about solving big enough problems. If you feel stuck right now in your life and you're like, Darren, I know about getting creative here, but because I've got these little problems that seem really big to me, maybe, just maybe, give yourself permission to experiment in actually trying to solve bigger problems. Makes me think of a story that Donald Miller told in one of his books about a friend whose daughter was kind of coming off the rails. She was dating a guy and the grades dropped and her whole demeanor, she changed as a little girl. She was a teenager. And Don and him sat down together and he said to Don said to his friend, he said, you know what? I wonder if maybe the issue is this new boyfriend is giving her a more exciting role to play in her life than you are. And he was a little offended by it. And he said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, in the story that he's letting her to play, the role she's playing is that she's the good girl gone bad that's with the bad boy, and she's, all the angst and all the stuff is happening. And that's a pretty exciting role for a teenager. In the movie that you're having her live, right, the issue that she's trying to go after is just, it's not riveting. It's not a great role. You need to invite her into a bigger experiment, a bigger story, a bigger role. And the story goes, Donald tells that his buddy went out and pledged to build an orphanage in Mexico. Like literally went and signed their name, like on the dotted line that they would pay to build an orphanage in Mexico before he even talked to his wife or anybody. And he came in and announced, we're building an orphanage in Mexico. And he goes on to tell the story. Evidently his wife didn't kill him, which was positive. But evidently what happened was within 2 weeks, the girl breaks up with the boy. The grades come back, the energy comes back, the life in her eyes come back, because now you see they had been invited into solving one of the world's biggest problems. And now instead of being a good girl gone bad, she was invited to get creative to solve one of the world's biggest problems. Now she was somebody fighting for orphans in Mexico. That's a good experiment to pull your family into. And those kind of creative ideas happen when you're growing spiritually. Last thought is this, and we'll jump into the interview: execution, which is just do it. Just do it. Got it from the mailbag this week. Got an email from a friend that listens to the podcast that said, I got an idea for this small group. We're going to help try to take care of people, be like a safe families thing. I don't feel equipped. I don't feel ready. I don't know. It could fail. And all of those, and you know who you are, listen to the podcast. Thank you for sending the email in. Do it. Just do it. Oh, Darren, what if it fails? I don't know if I'm creative or I'm enough to be able to do it. It doesn't matter, right? Try it. Fail, get a good story out of it. to say, you know what, one time I was growing in my spirit and I felt like God was saying, maybe go take care of people and start a group for people to be safe families for kids and vulnerable children. And then we did it and it failed. But I learned this and it was exhilarating. It was exciting. Like, just do it. Because you know what might happen? You might succeed wildly because God's spirit is speaking to you. He's guiding you and directing you because you've been awakened to become who you were born to be. And now you are actually taking risk to be creative in solving some of the world's greatest problems. And who knows if you don't become wildly successful and change the lives of thousands and thousands of people, or you could just do your life the way you've been doing it and move away from creativity and move away from risk. And I think you're going to move away from life because God has created you on purpose and for a purpose. And that's when life starts getting fun. Let's jump into this interview with Amy Christie. She is the director, associate pastor of creativity and continuity at Grace Church. You're going to be inspired by Amy's story. And when we finish up with her, we'll be right back, right here on the Daron Earlewine Podcast. Hey, I'm excited today to sit down with Amy Christie. And Amy, you are an associate pastor at Grace Church here in Indianapolis,
yes,
but not just a regular pastor, because you are a pastor of creativity and I believe continuity.
Yeah. Sure.
Let's
call it that for right now.
Let's stick with the creativity part.
Sure.
What is the continuity part about?
The continuity is because we have 3 campuses now. And so I've been at Grace for almost 25 years. And so it's keeping kind of the DNA of Grace at all 3 campuses.
Okay.
They're kind of their own. The message is the same everywhere.
Right.
It's on video. But as far as worship and other elements, that can be different. And so if there's an element that we're using across the board, like at all 3, then I'm usually in charge of making sure that comes together. And so I guess it's...
I like that. Not that inspired by it. Let's go back to creativity.
Right. Yeah.
Because that's what really is your jam and what I love. And I think is an element that is so missing, but yet so needed in the church, big C, across the world, but even within the community, or the kingdom of God. And one of the quotes I want to start with is a quote that you ever had a book that where you read it and you thought to yourself, like, I should have wrote this book.
Yes.
Like, this author wrote everything that's been in my brain. I remember I was 20, I don't know, maybe 23, 24, and I stumbled across Erwin McManus's book, An Unstoppable Force, which is kind of one of his first books. And it was all basically his thoughts about what the church could be and should be. And I remember reading and like every page, turning it, going, like, that's what I've been thinking. That's what I was saying. And this was a part where I was just getting done, with a dream of being a professional drummer and trying to create music. And it was in a way more artistic phase of my life. And in that book, Erwin says one of the core values they have for their church of Mosaic, which is one of the more creative churches in America, but he says it's in LA, so I guess you have to be. But he says that creativity is the natural result of spirituality. And he's gotten a lot of blowback for that kind of statement, people feeling like it's heretical, and which I can't understand. But that thought captured me and began to shape so much of what I wanted to do and create ministry-wise, because coming to the place of realizing that, yes, the church should be the epicenter of creativity and expression for the world, because we're connected to the Spirit of God, who is the most creative, source in the reason there is a universe. But that is something that is so missing from the church. Like, in all of your life, I know that's what your job is to do, and your passion is to bring the arts alive and creativity alive. Why do you think it's so missing in most American churches?
I think a lot of churches are scared of it. I think they're frightened of what the arts will bring out, what it will, because I believe art is prophetic.
Absolutely.
Even outside of the church. Artists that's what we're missing so much right now, is that we don't have those prophetic, artistic voices speaking new life into our world right now, because everything's shut down.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot of things being created, beautiful things being created. And I truly believe that truth, there's so much innate truth in the arts, period, just across the board. I think God speaks through the arts, even when the artists that are creating it don't realize that it's God speaking through it.
Absolutely.
And I think the church has been fearful of what that might open up in some of the ideas and some of the prophetic musings that might come from that, and that they might have to grapple with things that are outside of what they're comfortable with.
Yes.
And I think the church is very scared of artists in general.
I totally agree. One thing that was a light bulb moment for me is in our spiritual DNA course, one of the things we help people get their minds around is their apest function or voice in the kingdom of God. And so it comes from, Ephesians chapter 4, where it talks about apostles, prophet, evangelists, shepherds, or teachers. And I believe every single person that's, those are the archetypes that God has put within creation and with humanity. And one of the ways that we talk about the prophetic is another word that you can use there is the creative. Is the prophetic creative's voice and role within God's kingdom. I totally agree. I think we live in a church culture right now that has been shaped by shepherds and teachers. So we gather people, we love them, and that's great. Nothing wrong with that.
Right.
And we teach them the word of God. But the other voices, the other roles within the kingdom, I think we are scared of them, and we don't like to deal with them. And I think chief among them is the prophetic. You have not just served in the church. You've performed on stages and been in the entire theatrical world. Talk to me about being on the other side of the tracks of that as you've worked with artists, because I think that the church is scared of the prophetic and the artist. But I would say my observation, it seems like the art community has received that message as well. Right.
For sure.
We're scared of you,
absolutely.
and you're not welcome here. And would you say it's consistent? The art community feels that?
Yeah, I think I have a lot of artistic friends that would claim Jesus, would claim that they have a spiritual belonging, but not a church belonging. They don't want anything to, most of them, I can't say across the board, they don't want much to do with the church itself. I think they feel like organized religion has shunned them and pushed them away, and they know that they don't agree with a lot of who they are or what they're about, and so they know the church doesn't really want them around, or they're afraid to have them around. So yeah, I would definitely say that, and that was part of what made me want to bring the arts back to the church so desperately, was because I realized I had so many friends that were never going to come to a church service. They just weren't. I can't get them there. But they would come and be part of a production we were doing. They would come and maybe musically direct, or just audition for the show, or be engaged in some way. And that might be the way to draw them back into the community of Christ, to draw them back, or for the first time, bring them into a church setting, because they were willing to do what they're good at and what they love. Yeah. But they were not willing to walk into the doors for a service, so to speak. Yeah. So, yeah.
I want to get there, because you've been bringing the arts to your church community for over 20 years now, and I want to hear some of those stories. But I want to go back to the beginning of your story. Is where was it, and what's the story behind the moments where you began to realize, as a young girl, or maybe as a young woman, where you were like, I'm an artist. This is a big part of why God put me on earth. Take us there.
I have loved the arts since probably since before I can remember. Like, I just love, my number one love is to be on stage. I love to perform. I love musical theater. And I feel closest to God when I'm there. Yeah. And I knew that like really early on. Like, I knew that there was some deep spiritual connection for me to my Savior when I was doing that. And it evolved then that I understood, it's because I'm doing what I was made to do. Like, he made me to do this. Yeah. And then I started to think outside of myself. Okay, so this is great. I love doing this, and it draws me close to God. But what can the rest of it? How can I turn that and make it about other people too? Like, how can I help them figure out who this God is, and how they can have him as a part of their lives? And so yeah, I knew that there was something about being an artist and being creative that was part of just who I was. Like, it was innate. It was since before I could remember. So, and as I grew up, I started to understand, okay, that's who I'm supposed to be. That's my place in the world. And
was your church environment for you as a kid, was it encouraged?
Yes, because our youth pastor, who eventually became the senior pastor of Grace, that the church that I worked at, he was my youth pastor. He came in when I was 13 years old, and he was an artist. He was a musician, and so he knew, he loved the arts and like was all about it. And he saw it in me, and he called it out in me. And he really was the one. He did little shows like for our high school group. You know, we did like, I don't know, I think we did a Michael W. Smith thing called The Race Is On, and it was like his whole album, and I could actually sing songs. I could sing songs today from that, but
yeah.
So he knew that there was something about the arts in the church, and so that's really where it started to develop and grow into what would end up being a ministry for me.
Can you imagine? Here's the thing that I'm as you're saying this, Amy, is when I'm compassionately seeing Amy as a 13, 14-year-old girl, you're going, something comes alive in me when I'm performing. I feel like maybe there's something, like maybe God has put this within me. But then if you had been in an environment where people would have said, you can't perform songs that aren't in church, or right. that's not for that, the arts are bad, music is bad, theater is of the, like, and I think that breaks my heart to think of how many Amy's are out there that were beginning to sense their soul come alive and creativity and artistic expression, and then being told there's no way that's something that God would.
Right. There's no place for you here, is what it would have said to me. There's no place for you in the church. If I couldn't, and what would have ended up happening, I would have said goodbye to the church then. Yeah. Like I wouldn't have said, oh, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. I shouldn't do that. I would have said, you're wrong, and I'll go do it somewhere else then. I don't have to do it here. I can go away. So it would have just kept me from probably the richest spiritual journey that I could have.
No doubt.
Because it would have made me at least doubt it. I still think I would have had a relationship with Christ. I think that was already, I did that early on in my life. I didn't understand it quite, to the level that I did later. But yeah, I still would have had it, but I would have been like, the church is not for me. I don't want to be any part of those people.
Does that realization, is that part of what fuels you to bring arts to the church? Because there's a you out there that didn't have a pastor that came and said, I believe in the arts. I want to see this happen. I'm going to create the environment for it. And they may be right now on the outside looking in going, there's something in me still missing.
Yes. Yeah. And when Grace started, the arts was a huge part of it. Because again, Dave Rod, who was the senior pastor, he was an artist. He was my youth pastor. And so I never looked at a church thinking, oh, I could do the arts in church, because no church around me was, it was fine for the youth group.
Sure, right.
But nobody was doing in big church, no way. And so when we started Grace, we had no idea what we were doing. We were like, okay, well, here we are. We're a church. Okay, how are we doing this?
Right.
And I happened to be on the kind of the ground floor of all of that, because I was going to go, and I was like 18 years old at the time, and I was going to be a musical theater major at school. And so all of a sudden the arts were alive in that church. And I was like, wait a minute, we can do this in church. And so that just grew. And then as I went through college, I'm like, there's nothing more bonding than doing a show together. Doing a live theatrical production together. I've never had that kind of experience in any other group that I've been a part of, where you are working on this one thing that you all love so much and you all are sold out to, and you're working toward that goal, and you are just bonded together for that moment in time. Now the show ends and you might go your separate ways and maybe see each other in a year or two or never again. And so when I got through school, I'm like, okay, can you imagine if the Holy Spirit was moving in the midst of all of that, like that bonding and that working toward that common goal, and what that would do to the people that were involved in it? And so that's where it was birthed. I was like, there's more to this. We can have this deeper, richer experience by inviting the Holy Spirit into this space. And I just knew that that's what I was supposed to do. I didn't know how I was going to get there. I had no idea. So I was just like, I started researching all of these Christian theatrical companies and looking, and I'm like, yeah, okay, but I don't want to do Christian stuff. Like, I don't want to do Christian shows where it's all wrapped up in a bow, and that's not life, and that's not those aren't the kind of stories Jesus told. Like it wasn't all wrapped up. It was like, hey, go think about this and figure out what you think.
Yeah.
And so then all of a sudden we were like, let's do a big show at Grace. Like, let's do a full-blown musical. And I mean, I don't even know where it came from. I was part-time at the time that we did this, because I got hired at Grace as part-time. And it wasn't part of my job description. I was just like, I think we need to do a show. And so we did. And I looked around that room and I was like, oh my gosh, we're doing it. Like, this is exactly this is what he told me. This is what he put on my heart. And now he's figured out how we're going to do it. Like, I just went along for the ride. And then now here we are, and we've done like 20 different shows, I think. And they've all gotten bigger and better. And, you know, as we've gotten bigger and better. And, yeah, I mean, and people come and they're like, what is going on? Like, we came because we're like, a church is doing Les Miserables.
Right.
Please give me a break. And then they're like, we're coming back next weekend to see it again.
Wow.
Because we're just, and the lives that have been changed through the course of it has been immeasurable. Like, I mean, just the lives, people that have come back and said, yeah, I want a deeper relationship with Christ. I want to be part of a church now. I want, like, the relationships that have been formed. It's been like mind blowing to me. And honestly, I just feel like I've been along for the ride. Like, God has done it all. And I'm just like, okay, what are we doing next? Like, just show me where we're going. What are we doing?
In the past 20 years, are some of those stories that you're thinking of, the people's lives that have been changed, are there artists that maybe were like the 13, 14-year-old Amy that went on a different path because they said there was no place for you, and then they rediscovered their place in the kingdom through the shows?
Absolutely. Yeah. They found their calling, they found their place, they found their home, they found their people. They found their way back to a church community that they weren't even sure they wanted to be a part of. And they're in the midst of people that are like them. That, I mean, let's be honest, artists are a little off the wall and a little weird. And so they're together and they're like, oh, we get each other.
Yeah.
Like, we get each other. And yeah. And the shows, there's like this transcendent thing that happens that would never happen in regular community theater. Like, I've done a lot of shows other places, and they're magical and they're amazing, but there's a different level. It's not something that you can put your finger on, because it is the movement of the Holy Spirit in that space in a way that doesn't happen in a normal theater. It's transformative. And it's been that way for audiences too, where they're just like, I've never experienced anything quite like that. Yeah. And I mean, we've had people that were at the end of their rope, kind of actors that have come, and they're like, I mean, teenagers that were like, have shared stories of, I couldn't even find my place in my high school. And I was at the end of my rope. I mean, we're talking end of their rope. And they said, had we not done this show, had I not found this group of people that have loved me well and nurtured me, and I don't know that I would still be here. And those are just moments that you're like, I don't even know how to put my finger on something like that. Like, that is so Holy Spirit movement.
Yeah.
And he's just used the arts to heal people. And that's been one of the most beautiful parts of it, to watch this community come alive. And I just feel like I'm just kind of standing back and watching it all happen. And I get, a bird's eye view of watching this community develop. And the great thing about what we do is that it doesn't end when the show's over.
Yeah.
We have an ongoing community that meets together and prays with each other. And sometimes we do training or stuff like that for the arts. But more than that, we're a community for each other.
Yeah.
And we love each other, and we grieve with each other, and we celebrate with each other. And there's a lot of people that would have been fallen through the cracks had they not had an artistic community in the church that they could go to.
One thing I think about, Amy, is that and there are some churches that, a majority of churches in America are very small, 100 or less people.
Right.
There are, though, a lot of churches that are larger churches, mega churches, a church the size of Grace that has, they have a world-class sound system. They have a world-class, lighting system. They have the audio-visual setup to be able to be that kind of gift to a community. And, I just think about, right now I wonder in this this post-COVID reality. And I hadn't thought about this until we're having this conversation. That's why I love doing these podcasts, because we just find ourselves in the midst of a conversation that leads us to cool places. But one of the things I've seen is so many long-standing music venues will not make it through this.
Yeah.
Places that people have found, expression and hope and the joy of being in a live music venue, whatever. And I just wonder, if more Christian leaders and Christian artists could get a vision like that you have gotten in the gift that you've brought to Grace, that these churches that are scattered all over the country, is if they could become epicenters of creative expression, what kind of gift it would bring that people could come in and go, oh my gosh, I never knew I could experience something this full of life and that is invigorated my mind but also my spirit, and there may be such an even greater need for that in a post-COVID world. Who knows how many venues or theaters will close in the process?
Oh, for sure. And being small doesn't need to be a limitation.
Yeah.
It's just a breeding ground for more creativity. That's when your back's against the wall, is when at least for me, when I'm the most creative, because I'm like, oh, we can't do this. Okay, well then let's figure out a different way to do it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, we have an opportunity as the church. We have a huge opportunity post-COVID to re-engage people and find new ways of engaging people. And I think the arts could play a huge role in that, because a lot of the bigger places, Broadway's probably not coming back until fall of 2021 at the earliest to figure out how to do this with social distancing and masks. And I mean, it's so we're looking at a time when the arts could be kind of dead in the normal sense, in the way that we're used to it. So it is a huge opportunity for us to get super creative and figure out new ways to engage people and engage artists and engage audiences, because everybody needs the arts. Everyone.
Yeah.
I don't care if you think that you hate musical theater or every heart needs the arts. It opens us up in a way that nothing else will. And that's why God is creative, and he created artists because he knew the world needed that and needed that truth and beauty in a way that, a new way of expression. It's a different way. And what's so interesting is our church has been like it, we're not back fully. We are live, but our congregation, 2/3 of them are not coming back yet. They're just not ready to be in a building, I guess, or they don't want to wear masks or whatever the situation is.
Sure.
But we were supposed to do a full production this year, a musical, and we of course couldn't do that. But I just said, so what are we going to do? Because we got to engage our artists. Because they need to do stuff. Artists don't want to sit. They don't want to sit around dormant for too long. They want to create. So we did a show out on our lawn. We just put up a stage and grabbed a sound system and went out on the lawn, and we did the best songs from the shows we've done in the past. And we had like 750 people show up to watch it, because they were dying to get out of their house and they were dying to see it, to experience the arts. And we had food trucks and people sat and social distanced, and we had all these filters for our mics that people would stick on when it was their turn to sing. And it was a little clunky, like it wasn't perfect. But it was beautiful and it was so necessary. And I looked out at that crowd and I thought, oh my word, they needed this. Even if they didn't know they needed it, they do now.
Yeah.
Because they're filled in a different way. And I looked at the stage I had 70 artists come back to be a part of it. Some people that don't even go to Grace anymore, but they've been part of our shows, and and I looked at the joy, on their faces. They were just so glad to be together and be creating something, even though it wasn't something new. We'd done a lot of the songs prior to that night, but it was beautiful. So you just got to get creative, but it is an opportunity for us to take advantage of a really unfortunate circumstance that we're in. But we can move this forward in a new way, and we can move his kingdom forward in a new way, in a new creative way that maybe we never thought we'd have to, but we're kind of up against a wall now. So it's time to get busy and get creative.
I love that. I haven't heard that phrase before. You said every heart needs the arts, and that is so true. I mean, I think about, when one of the first things that emerged, I felt like, when we were all quarantined this year, was all of a sudden you started seeing all these artists that were like, hey, I'm going to set up in my living room and put my iPhone up and I'm going to start performing. Mm-hmm. And the amount of people they had joining them through live streams, it was like these moments where we can't go anywhere, we can't do anything, but like if I can get in a virtual space, even with someone who is creating art, like it brought people hope, it brought people comfort.
Oh, yeah.
And there's no doubt, in my mind, it's like, and that's why, I mean, God is the most creative artist in the universe. He created the universe, and there's something absolutely transcendent that happens in the human soul when we're in that environment. I love what you're saying. I totally agree with it, is that what we need to create the future we're going to live in is the artist to get out in the forefront of that. And there is a risk, right? Mm-hmm. Because I think when we give artists the permission to create, and it's one thing to perform. It's beautiful to see people perform art that's already been created, right. In performance. Mm-hmm. I'm so excited to see if we could become courageous enough, and this is difficult because artists will create things. I mean, I think about even in the political and even racial climate we have in our country, is we need to have artists bring us back to the heartbeat of God for justice. You know what I mean? And there would be some art created that I'm sure a lot of really nice conservative Christian folks would be like, I don't feel like that is very godly, right. And that hurts my feelings, and that's right. Offensive. Right. And it's like, and you go back and read the Bible, and you're like, I mean, was it Jeremiah that laid like naked on his left side right. for like 3? Like, it's like, yeah. I mean, you think somebody tried that like in the front yard of the church. Hey, what's Bill doing out there? Oh no, he's been naked for 3 days. Right. You know what I mean, like, I'm not in no way.
Jeremiah was maybe a performance artist. Something. We didn't even know it.
In no way am I saying somebody should lay naked on the front porch of their church.
We're not going to try that.
No, none of that. I'm just saying is when prophets start creating mm-hmm. and communicating the heart of God, things get uncomfortable, but they also become transformative.
Right. And art creates empathy. When you watch something, you could talk to someone forever and try and change their mind or get them to see your point of view. Through the arts, though, sometimes it sneaks up on them and they don't even know they're changing their mind. They're watching beauty and truth, and they don't even realize it creates a sense of empathy or sympathy, whatever you want to call it. I think it's more empathetic, where people don't even know, oh, wait a minute. Like I see something in a new way. I see something in a different way. It's like Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird, walking in someone else's shoes. Put yourself in that. And the arts allows people to do that, sometimes in a non-threatening way, sometimes in a way that they don't suspect that that's happening at all. And then they're done and they're like, huh, yeah. All of a sudden, maybe I think a little differently about or feel differently. So I think there's a huge need for it because people are so divided at this time that you need the arts to.
Oh my gosh! This brought me back to a couple weeks ago. I got a chance to be part of a prayer gathering out in this middle of this field in Kansas, and the whole day we talked about the need for racial reconciliation with the First Nations people, African American culture, and then there was a whole portion of the day of praying for healing and redemption from abortion. But Amy, they had a moment where there was a First Nations leader there who talked about what the First Nations people were doing to sow seeds of forgiveness into our country. And then this leader said, I want to sing a song that we have sung for generations as First Nations people about God and about his forgiveness and he sang this song in his native tongue. Obviously none of us knew the language, but in this open field, he had a beautiful, just rich voice. And as he's singing these words that no one knew what they were, but the soul of the man and of the message, you could just sense that it changed the atmosphere in this field in a way that he could have talked for 2 hours about redemption and reconciliation and healing. But in this moment, as he sang, and it was like I say, it was transformative. Right. and there was an empathy that became tangible on the field that day, and it was brought in by song.
Yeah. It transforms people without them knowing it. And that's what's kind of beautiful about it. So I've wanted to do this show Ragtime forever. And it's about the turn of the 20th century, and it's got all these themes of racism and immigration and things that unfortunately, sadly, we're still dealing with today.
Yeah.
Topics that should be, not relevant, but they are super relevant. And you're watching the show, and at one point the black couple is singing about the son that they're going to have and their dreams for him, and everything that they're singing about are things that are not totally come to fruition for young black men today. Things that we should be well beyond where they were in the turn of the 20th century, but we really aren't. And I have friends that I've had tough discussions with about my white friends that I've had difficult discussions with about a lot of these topics. But you watch this couple sing about their son and their dreams, and you can't help but be drawn in. And all of a sudden, you feel something, and you feel differently, and you think differently because you're connected to them. You're connected to these characters, and to you've bought into what they're providing you, and all of a sudden you see everything differently in the whole topic because you're drawn into this story and to the characters, and it just can open up people in ways that really there is nothing else that can open up people in the ways that the arts do, not emotionally. Yeah. And the quote I was looking for before we came on here, I cannot remember, I couldn't find it exactly, but I do know that the gist of it was that we as artists in the church, if we are not creating, if we are not using our God-given gifts, then we are being disobedient. And I'm like, that hits me close to home. That if we are artists and we are not doing it, if we're not creating new, and we're not creating truth and beauty through the arts, then we're being disobedient to the call that God has on our lives.
That's huge. Wow. I don't think I can add much to that.
Well, I wish I could find the quote itself because it was really powerful. I did okay, but it was better.
No, the gist of it is powerful. And I think what kills me sometimes is I feel like I've grown up in the church and we become unbelievably passionate about not doing bad things. Mm-hmm. And I wonder what would happen if we could just get almost as passionate about doing the good, about stepping into those moments and bringing our best, to the Lord, specifically if they're artistic, and to be open to the honesty of that. I love Bono talks about that, that David was the first great blues artist. You know what I mean? As you read the Psalms, he's singing the blues, and there's grit and there's honesty, and there's Psalms that don't end with like the perfect ending, or and it's like if we could open up and allow the arts to be as honest as our hearts actually are. I know the church could be back to the forefront of being the epicenter of creativity, and in that being the epicenter of empathy and a road back to the heart of God.
Right. And understanding. Like, and David had a lot. He had a lot to sing the blues about.
Oh, yeah.
And yet that's how we should be welcoming our artists into our community too. I mean, like, we all have a lot of David in us. Yeah. We're all broken. We're all sinners. We're all making mistakes all the time. So can we just see past that and extend the grace of God and mercy and forgiveness and welcome broken people, artists and others into our churches, and just allow them to express that brokenness and just come alongside them and help them figure out what it looks like to get to wholeness and healing.
Yeah.
Because artists are broken. That's part of why they create art.
Yeah.
Is because the brokenness is deep, and they've gotta, they say in musical theater, why do they sing? Because talking isn't enough anymore. You've got to sing because the emotion is so raw that talking isn't enough. It doesn't cover it. You've got to express it in a new way. And I think that's how artists are with creating things. I can't sit in this anymore. I've got to create something to help move me toward healing. And I think the church could learn a lot from that.
I love it. Last question I want to hit us with today, Amy, is this. There's Amy circa 20 years ago listening from Kansas City or from Arizona, or maybe she's in Georgia. She's somewhere, and she's where you were 20 years ago. She's got a little bit of a dream. She wants to see her church be an expression of God's heart to the artistic community. What's a word of encouragement you would give her right now if she's at a place where it's not happening, it doesn't exist?
Don't be afraid to push your agenda. If you feel like your agenda is from God, and it's a dream that He's instilled in your heart, push it and push hard for it. And don't be afraid because you're a woman either to push hard for it, because that can be a part of the struggle, and at times has been part of my struggle. But if God has given you that dream, push for it. And don't let people tell you that if they absolutely won't allow you to do it, then maybe it's telling you need to go somewhere else to figure out how to do it. And the people that told you that you couldn't do it there will wind up someday coming back and saying, we made a huge mistake. I think it's some level like we should have let you do but don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to push what you believe is the truth that God has placed and the calling that He's placed on your heart. If you believe that it's from Him, don't back down, push for it, and then open palmed wait for Him to guide you in the right direction. Because that's the one thing I will say is I've pushed hard for things at certain times. I do think you have to discern when is the right time and when is not.
Sure.
But I have also just let God kind of take me along for the ride, and I have just said, okay, here we are. What's next? What are we doing next? So I would say cling to Him, and when He gives you the thought, when you know it's from the Holy Spirit, and it can come in so many different ways, push for what He's placed on your heart. Don't back down.
I love it. Amy, Christie, I love it. Thank you for joining us. If someone wants to stay connected, maybe would you be willing to take some emails or whatever, reach out and say, hey, help me out, coach me through this, whatever.
Yep.
What's the best way for people to stay connected to you?
Amy C at gracechurch.us.
Amy C at gracechurch.us. You heard it here first on the Daron Earlewine Podcast. Amy, thanks so much. It's been a joy.
Thank you.
And we're back. Hey, friend, did you enjoy that interview? I know I did. I tell you what I'm going to do immediately after this. Get Chick-fil-A, huh? Quit it with the laughter. You're too kind. You're too kind. Oh, Amy, Christie, so good, right? Using creativity, the arts to awaken people, to inspire people. And you know what? Like, what if she hadn't? Like, I know Grace Church because it's in our town and the impact it's had in our community. I'm thinking, what if Amy had been like, well, I don't know. We can't be creative in the church. We just have to have lame music and terrible skits. I'm sorry. Oh, my gosh. I'm laughing at okay, sorry. Terrible skits. Oh, gosh. Have you ever been to church camp and seen how terrible some of the skits are? I laugh because it hurts my heart because I grew up in the church and I know how terrible it can be. But it doesn't have to be when we can allow God to actually begin to stir the spiritual life of God and the Holy Spirit within us and become creative. And that means artistic. I love the point Amy made in there about that so often the church, and Erwin makes the same point in his book, that the church and the arts don't hang out very much. And here's why. You'll learn this if you go through spiritual DNA, is that most often artists are prophets. They're prophets and they speak God's heart and truth. And most of the time, guess what? We don't want to hear that because it's uncomfortable. And so we kick the artists out because they don't always make everything nice and easy. And maybe they use foul language. And we're like, well, we know if there's foul language, it's probably not from the Lord. I don't know if people sound like that when they say that, but they may. I disagree with that. We're not going to get into biblical debate about that. But sometimes you just need to see truth and actually awaken you to what is real and where maybe there is hypocrisy and maybe where we are missing the point. We need to come back to the heart of God. It was a little bit odd. I think it was Jeremiah, or was it Coop? Which guy laid on his side naked for like 3 days in the Old Testament? Anybody? It wasn't Job. No, it was Jeremiah or Ezekiel. One of those dudes. One of the prophets. That seems a little bit aggressive. I mean, can you imagine if at your local Christian high school all of a sudden there's a prophet in the parking lot and he's laying there naked for 3 days? That would be really inappropriate in a lot of ways. Not at the high school, college. College would be more not. You'd still go to jail. Let's be honest. You would still be arrested for the 3-day nakedness. But sometimes artistic, prophetic things are abrasive and they're necessary. And Amy, keep up the good work. If you're an artist and you're listening, if your creativity actually takes the form of artistic expression, we need you in the church. We need you to put the heart and the mind of God out through poems and spoken word and books and music and songs and movies and screenplays and paintings, photography. We need it within the church. And continue to grow. Take a look at your expectations of who God is and who you could be through him. Take a look at your experiences. Become a sponge and a filter. Another tribute to Eddie Van Halen, right? Remember in an interview, Eddie said that for an artist, you're always a sponge and a filter, meaning you're always absorbing other influences. Like you're soaking them up, what you read, what you listen to, what you're around, the people that surround you. You soak all that up as a sponge, and then in the creative, artistic process, you're squeezed out and you're like a filter, and that filters out everything that you've absorbed. So pay attention to what you're absorbing, the experiences around you, and then it's time to execute. Let's go after it. And I'm going to end with this great quote from Erwin. Erwin said this: "The history of God's people is not a record of God searching for courageous men and women who could handle the task, but God transforming the hearts of cowards and calling them to live courageous lives." Oh my gosh, if that's not a mic drop, I don't know what is. So you say, Daron, maybe I could be creative, but I'm a coward. Good news, friend, because the history of God and his people is not a record of God searching for courageous men and women who could handle the task, but he's transforming the hearts of cowards like you and me and calling them to live courageous lives. And I would add creative lives. Hey, become what you were born to be, because it's a heck of a lot more fun than existing. Thanks for hanging out. Appreciate it. Love you guys. Would love to hear from you. You can email me personally, Daron@blackbirdmission.com. Hit me up on all the socials, Facebook, Instagram. I'm out there. Would love to communicate with you. And if you haven't, head over to spiritualdna.me. Jump in Spiritual DNA. You can ask questions and be in dialogue with me and our team as you're taking the course. And take those next steps. Right on, friends. We'll talk to you next week right here on the Daron Earlewine Podcast. Until then, remember these 3 things. God's for you, not against you. God's near you, not far from you. And God has created you on purpose and for a purpose. Talk to you next week.